Hi there. Today I'm going to be covering Chapter 3, the marketing research process. Let's jump in. Today we're going to cover 4 key learning objectives. The first is to identify how marketing researchers contribute to decision making. The second is to describe the 3 types of marketing research. Then we'll list the major stages of the marketing research process and talk about some of the steps within each. And then finally we'll identify the difference between a research project and a research program. Let's get started. The first thing that I want you to consider is the amount of uncertainty that goes with decision making. And there's always going to be some level of uncertainty that goes with the decisions that we make, whether it be in our personal life or in business. So the whole point of marketing research is to get us to a more certain position to make better decisions. And the more amount of information that we have will lead us to a more certain position in our decision making. So you can think of decision making and uncertainty even in your daily drive to work or to school. There is a lot of uncertainty because we don't know if there's going to be a wreck up ahead. We don't know if there's going to be our car could break down. There are many different variables that could come into play. There could actually be more traffic on the road than normal, and we just don't really know about it because unless you're using your GPS system, and even sometimes with your GPS, it's not always going to report everything in real time because not every one is updating and putting information in simultaneously. So there is a lot of uncertainty that goes with our decisions and the decisions that business people make on a daily basis. So marketing research helps with getting towards a more certain position to make better decisions. So what is decision making? So whenever we think of decision making, we typically think about where we have a choice between one or two different options. Usually we can say, okay, yes, we're going to make this decision, or we're not. We're going to follow through with going to this route to work, or we can choose a different route. Or I'm going to choose this coffee over a cappuccino. So there's many different ways that you can think of, even on a small personal basis, that we have many different decision alternatives that we can choose from to solve a problem. If you want caffeine, you can choose a tea, you can choose an energy drink. There's so many different options available to you whenever you make that decision. Now, what is the role of marketing research in our decision making? And that's really important. So marketing research is going to help us recognize different problems, and it will help us recognize and diagnose different symptoms or opportunities that may be associated with those problems. We'll also be able to identify how much information we currently have, so how much information the organization currently has, how much information that is available to us, and then also how reliable that information is. And finally, marketing research is going to help determine what information we need to better deal with the situation at hand. So if we have a problem, we're faced with that, we need to have some type of information, but we're most likely going to have to conduct marketing research to get a strong understanding and to be able to make that decision. Because if we were to, say for instance, just make that decision without any information, it's highly unlikely that we're going to make a good decision because we don't have any information to back it up. But whenever you conduct marketing research, you get that information that you need, and you can better appraise the situation and make a better decision. So that is how marketing research plays into decision making. Next, we will talk about the 3 different types of research discussed in the textbook: exploratory, descriptive, and causal research. The first being exploratory research. Exploratory research is exactly what it sounds like. Exploratory research is used to explore, and it's usually conducted whenever you don't really have a strong grasp of the situation at hand or the decision that needs to be made, or there's little to no knowledge available for you to be able to assess that situation, problem, or opportunity. So it's really good whenever we need to clarify some type of ambiguous situation. So if you recall from that ambiguous uncertainty and certainty degrees that we showed, this would be in the most ambiguous or the most type of uncertainty whenever we would need to conduct exploratory research, whenever we have literally nothing available to give us an indication of how to address that problem, that situation, or that opportunity. Or we may want to use exploratory research to discover an idea. So many times with exploratory research, the reason why we're conducting it is because we may have some general idea of what we think is happening in some situation or the problem that we want to address. However, whenever we conduct exploratory research, it often leads us down new avenues and new paths that we may have never even thought of before. So that's why exploratory research is really good for us in marketing research. And so really the main thing that exploratory research does is it's going to clarify and define the nature of a particular problem. What that means is we don't have conclusive evidence, but it's at least a starting point for us to conduct future research. And so from this, we may be able to understand our research problem a little bit better. Say, for instance, you think that you know all that there is to do with this problem or opportunity, but once you conduct that exploratory research, you find out new aspects associated with your research problem. And that's why exploratory research can really help a marketing researcher whenever there's a really ambiguous situation or a really ambiguous problem that the company needs to address. It's very useful in product development because we can use this exploratory research to figure out how to best design a product, and we can figure out the most useful features and benefits that the features would provide to potential customers. So it's really in that ideation stage that exploratory research is going to be conducted. And then finally, it will help the company identify symptoms of problems. Oftentimes, whenever we have a problem that we're faced with, we don't necessarily know all the different symptoms and all the different causes that are associated with that problem. So that's why we conduct this exploratory research, to hopefully be able to identify some of those symptoms. That way we can have a better understanding of the problem or opportunity at hand. So that's exploratory research. Next, we're going to talk about descriptive research. And descriptive research seeks to describe something. Specifically, whenever we conduct descriptive research, which is usually our surveys, that's the most common form of descriptive research, is we use those to describe some type of population of interest. So we may be looking at different consumer groups, and we'll be able to understand the characteristics of that group of people, different groups of organizations. Say, for instance, we're looking at like the e-commerce sector. We want to better understand that. We would conduct descriptive research, and that's what's really great, which you'll find out in the secondary research module, is there's lots of secondary research available to give you an understanding of some of these things already, but we can conduct primary descriptive research as well. So the questions that descriptive research seeks to address are the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. So basically, have a strong understanding of the problem and the issue at hand, and this is going to give you greater accuracy because the descriptive research typically has to do with numbers, and the numbers that you're collecting are usually you could say your sales, how many units sold, how often the customers spend in the store. All of these things would be descriptive research because you can say and you can describe all of those different things. You can describe how much your sales were, you can describe how long a customer spent in the store, and for instance, whenever I have that example, online versus traditional MBA student profiles, we could look at the groups, those two groups, and see who primarily makes up the online MBA student profiles versus the traditional MBA student profiles. We could also ask them questions to see why they chose the online versus the traditional. We could ask them how they went about choosing online versus the traditional. And that way we could get a better understanding of how we need to target different types of consumer profiles to get more people in the online that's targeted towards those who are most likely to choose online, and then how to get more people in the traditional MBA program targeted towards those who are more likely to enter the traditional MBA program. So you can see how it's really important. But with this, like I said, you have to have a considerable understanding of the problem. And so that's why generally we start with exploratory and then we move to the descriptive stage, especially if we don't have that great of an understanding of the problem at first. So many times we would conduct a diagnostic analysis, and this is mentioned in your textbook. It's used to diagnose reasons for market outcomes. So you could say, why is there decreased French wine sales among casual consumers? Well, we could establish a reason for that, and we could diagnose this problem by conducting descriptive research. We could figure out, okay, is it because casual consumers believe that French wines are more of a luxury item, and so they feel like it's out of their price range or doesn't fit with their identity. We could look at many different reasons why casual consumers aren't purchasing those French wines anymore. And then finally, diagnostic analysis allows us to assess the beliefs and feelings consumers have about and toward competing products. So think about if you are a company like Apple and you want to figure out, okay, why are consumers purchasing Samsung products over the Apple products, or even Microsoft over Apple? You can really get to a good understanding of the beliefs and feelings consumers have about Samsung or Microsoft, and then get also their feelings towards Apple. And that way you can maybe address some of those concerns and figure out how to best bring more of Samsung and Microsoft customers to Apple. Of course, that would be a very difficult thing to do, but at least if you have a stronger understanding of the problem through marketing research, you can begin to address how you're going to take more of the market share. Last type of research that we will talk about is causal research. And this allows us to make causal inferences. And by causality, what we mean is that there's some type of cause and effect associated with this. So you can think about X brought about Y relationships. I'm sure that you've seen in many different aspects this X leads to Y, and that's pretty common in any type of statistics or even in the algebra class you may have had in middle school or high school. A lot of times we deal with these X and Y type relationships. And some of the critical pieces of causality are temporal sequence, and this has to do with the time order of events. So with temporal sequence, we mean that X came before Y. So generally what we're looking at is X leads to Y. If we said Y led to X, then that means that Y comes before X. So that's whenever we really have to understand our relationships that we're talking about. And if you ever heard the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg, this is kind of one of those problems that a philosophical type problem that has been posed throughout the centuries. And we don't know here. It's been said that the chicken came first, it's been said that the egg came first, but in most of our problems, we're going to know that, okay, for instance, X, what we could say is the construction at the end of your street caused you to be late for work. So X, the construction that was at the end of your street, caused you to take a longer time to get to work. So the construction comes before you getting to work late. And that's what I mean by the temporal sequence. Concomitant variation, and this is really a difficult thing that students have a hard time grasping usually. It means that two events vary systematically. So whenever we think about this, we can bring up the driving to get to work situation. So as the more construction that occurs on your way to work, the longer that it's going to take you to get to work. Or the larger the number of cars out on the road during your specific time that you go to work, the longer that it's going to take you to work. Sometimes it may be that it takes you less time to get to work, and that may be because there's less traffic out on the road. So the more traffic versus the less traffic, that's going to cause you to have different variations in your time that you're going to get to work. And that is what I mean, is that sometimes you're going to get to work early, sometimes you're going to get to work late, oftentimes you're going to get to work right on time, and that's because there is some variation due to traffic, due to construction, maybe you broke down. There's many different reasons why you may have variation, but the same goes for X and Y relationships. So think about from a retail standpoint, seasonality can be a big standpoint in our sales, and so there is variation in the season. And we could think about this in the online versus classroom setting as well. So there is variation in terms of how do online classes perform in comparison to face-to-face classes. We know that there's some type of variation that goes into play with this. And so we could assess whether online classrooms perform better than face-to-face classrooms, and we could assess the variation between the two. And finally, non-spurious association. So non-spurious, we would like to have non-spurious association because we want to say that there is no confounding factor. And the confounding factor is something else that is causing our results to be affected this way. And there's a great video that talks about this. Causation doesn't equal correlation. Correlation doesn't equal causation. And that is really the key here, is that there is potentially some situations where you may have a correlation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're related, because there's some other factor that is affecting that relationship. Next, we're going to talk about the stages in the research process. And I really like this visual that the book provides. So first, you have to define your research objectives. Then you move to the research design and getting a sample, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and finally our conclusions and reporting. So if you see this, this is basically our process for your course project. We're starting out, I told you to come up with an idea for the project. Then we're going to define the objective and our research questions. Next, we're going to formulate our exploratory research design. However, we're not going to conduct that because we have such a short class time. And then we're going to actually do our survey, obtain a sample, collect the data, analyze the data, and then finally report your results from that survey. Some alternatives in the research process, and these are really important because they have an influence in how the research is going to be conducted. We have to choose from many number of alternatives in terms of what type of research we want to conduct, the method that we want to use, and how much time and money we want to put into our research. So a lot of times time can affect validity. And whenever we're thinking about this, whenever we use the fastest option, that may not necessarily be the best alternative. So we have to consider all the different research methods that we're going to talk about in future chapters that may take a little bit more time, but we may get better data. And a lot of times with money and human resources, whenever we have both of those plentiful, available, we can get higher quality and more valid data in a more timely manner because we have the money to be able to pay participants to give us good quality information, and we have the human resources to be able to also go out and collect that data as well. So this is a really nice visual in your textbook as well. It's a lot bigger than that smaller visual that I showed you a couple slides ago, but this really gets to the heart of the full research process. And our research objectives are really the goals that we're hoping to achieve from our research. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that whenever we're talking about these different terminologies, our deliverables that we're going to give are those final end reports that we would give to the client or we would give to our boss. And that's more of a consulting term, but deliverables are pretty important. Deliverables are what you're going to give to me at the end of your course project. So our research proposal, that is what the research seeks to accomplish. So we usually will formulate our proposal, and that's basically what you gave to me was somewhat of a research proposal because you gave me an idea and something that you wanted to look at in further depth. And that has to do with your decision that you want to make. The deliverables are kind of what you're going to be developing with the research objectives and your research questions. And then I've already defined the research process for you because we go from, again, your research objectives, research questions, and all the way to the survey, sampling, collection, and then analysis and reporting of your findings. So why should we conduct exploratory research? We've already talked about this a little bit, but many times we have to discover and define new opportunities and decisions. We also are able to narrow the scope of our research. So many times we start out with these big research, overarching research questions, and exploratory research helps us narrow down the scope of our research towards what's most important. So we may think that developing an app is really the way that we need to go as a company. However, maybe we don't know all the features that we need to include in that app. Well, exploratory research is going to help us narrow down some of these different ideas that we need to come up with. So, of course, it transforms that ambiguity into more focus. It clarifies our objectives. And we can generally do this through interviews, observations. We can look at online content as well, that's secondary data. And the textbook identifies some exploratory techniques. So I just mentioned previous research. We're going to talk more about this whenever you get to the secondary research chapter. Chapter 6, pilot studies. This is really important and done quite often. They're small scale. A lot of times we'll start out with a focus group just to get that ideation stage going. And in chapter 5, and module 6, you will look at how to conduct a focus group, how marketing research and focus groups are conducted in real life and in a natural setting. So that'll be really interesting to see. I found an awesome video that shows you how that's done and takes you into the heart of doing a focus group. Case studies, this can be done where you look at a specific business case. And this is less common because it's less generalizable. So many times, if you're looking at a business case, you're not going to be able to get that information readily. It's not readily available. However, it's usually only applicable to the business that the case is over. And then finally, looking at experience surveys like customer satisfaction. If you think about if you've ever been on a website and you get a pop-up at the end of your purchase that says, take this 5-question survey, that's basically what this is. They can ask a few questions and figure out what needs to be improved, that sort of thing. So the last few slides that we're going to talk about are the elements of a research objective, which is really important for us, especially as we move towards that part 2 of the project. So you have to state your research objective formally. Whatever you want to accomplish with your research, you have to state that formally. It will help you determine the type of research you're going to need. So sometimes your research objective may be able to be clarified just with interviews or focus groups. You may not need to go beyond that. However, typically you would. It would also indicate what type of information or data or intelligence you may be able to obtain from the data that you collect. And your objectives are going to drive your research process. So you start out with your objective. Maybe your objective isn't really clear, so you have to go through the exploratory research phase to hone your objective and then proceed from there. So this objective is really important for you to develop, and sometimes you have multiple goals or objectives that you want to accomplish. The next thing we're going to talk about is the research design. And we're just covering the basics here. We're going to go into this in a lot more detail in the next chapters because there's so many different aspects of different methods and different designs that we can implement in our study. But the research design has to do with how you're actually going to collect and analyze the data. So if you think about it, text data, our words, those have to be analyzed in a different way than numbers do. And we're not going to be able to get into actual doing text analysis in this class, but it is something interesting that you could pursue in your classes in the future or just on your own. It also, our research design is going to determine what types of information we're able to collect. So typically with surveys, we would be able to collect qualitative and quantitative data. There's also the option for us to do observations, focus groups, interviews, many different things that we could do, many different methods that we could use to get different types of information. So the design technique, and that's basically what I've been referring to here, surveys, experiments, observations. We'll get more into those in the coming chapters. And then our sampling method. We have a whole chapter dedicated to sampling method, so you'll definitely learn a lot more about sampling method. And then finally, our research design, what we have to consider is the schedule and the cost. So many times our research may incur very high costs, especially if it takes a lot of human resources and effort. And so we really have to be cognizant of our schedule, the flexibility that we have, and the schedule of our employees. So finally, I want to talk about the research program and the research project and drawing conclusions. So with the research program, that is more of something that you would do on a long-term basis. And this would be where you're maybe focused on introducing that new product or introducing a startup. And so you may have many different research projects that go to that research program, answering the research objectives and research questions that you may have for that startup. You're not going to probably figure everything out all in one go, and that's why we usually have multiple research projects going on to figure out these different, answer these different questions and be able to achieve our goals with our research. So with drawing conclusions, we're able to do this from our data analysis, and that helps us make more informed decisions because we have then more concrete responses. We have these concrete data that's available to us. We can see black and white that these things exist, and we have data to prove it. It will hopefully address our research questions. However, sometimes the data that we collect doesn't always match. Hopefully it will. But as I mentioned with like exploratory research, it may redirect our research questions. But it allows us to answer and provide information to both our managers and other users who may potentially use our research. So we're not always using research or conducting research for ourselves. We may be conducting research for the new product development team or for human resources to understand their hiring process, how they can attract more potential employees to the firm. So marketing research has many different aspects that it can be involved in for the different reporting and drawing conclusions. And finally, whenever we do this, it's usually presented in a formal report or a presentation, and you're going to present it in a formal report. If we were doing this in class, I would have you provide both a report and give a presentation, because then we could see exactly, you could give that whole presentation to the class. So that's it for all of the aspects of this chapter. Next chapter and module, we are going to go over ethics of the marketing research process, and then we're also going to talk about a day on the job as a marketing researcher, because I think it's really important for us to understand what is it that a marketing researcher actually does on a day-to-day basis. Because of course you're going to get a flavor of that by completing that course project, but oftentimes the project that we're conducting in class would be conducted through many different stages, and you would have many different research projects that go into an overall research program. So that's it for today. If you have any questions about Chapter 3, please feel free to email me at kt.manus@ttu.edu. Thank you.